Volkanovsky versus Holloway 2. Another controversial decision. Another letdown for many fans around the globe. As usual, judges will receive all of the blame. But the truth is, even with competent judges, decisions often leave a bad taste in the mouth of people who saw the fight differently. Deep inside, we all know it. The scoring system is flawed. The structure of this system is a recipe for controversy and for decisions that describe the fight terribly. Yes, judges need to get better, but the real problem is the system. Why? Because even when the judges are correct, we sometimes feel robbed. We feel robbed when someone wins two super close rounds, gets battered in the third, and still gets the win. We feel robbed when two judges give 30-27s in opposite directions. We feel robbed because the scorecards rarely ever reflect how the fight played out. 29-28 can be an outrageous domination, but it can also be the tightest of contests. As fans, it's infuriating, but for the fighters, it's simply unfair, and it needs to stop. That's why I've got a proposition, which I hope will start a constructive discussion. A new scoring system. A system that still respects the same scoring criteria, that still lets some space for subjectivity, but that is actually representative of the fight. Judging MMA will never be easy nor perfect, but this new system holds judges, fighters, and coaches accountable for their decisions. It will facilitate the debates after controversial fights, but most of all, it will really show how good or how bad a performance was. First, let's take a look at this proposed system, and then we'll try to understand how it can correct recurrent problems in MMA decisions. To finish, we'll try to judge Volkanovsky versus Holloway 2 with that new system and see if it makes sense. So, the first rule that would really help with MMA decisions, an open system. That means the scores will appear in between rounds on the big screen. Honestly, I don't understand why it's not a thing already. Now the scores. A judge should score a round for the winner 10-9, 10-8, or 10-7, just like in the present system. Here's the difference. A 10-9 means that you think the fighter won the round, but you are not 100% sure. If the round is close, it's always a 10-9. With a 10-9, you think that scoring the round for the other fighter is debatable. Now, 10-8. It simply means that you are 100% sure the fighter won the round. It means the winner of the round is not debatable. In your mind as a judge, scoring it the other way is simply impossible. It's a clear round. Finally, 10-7 is the equivalent of the present 10-8. It means the fighter 100% won the round, while the opponent suffered significant damage without offering a significant response. As you can imagine, the main thing this system does is making 10-8s way more frequent. It finally gives a new identity to 10-8s. A clear-cut round is finally worth more than a razor-thin one. Before diving more deeply into this, here's one last proposition. Why not bring in 5 judges? Why? There's literally no good reason why we shouldn't have 5 judges instead of 3. Case closed. Now let's get back to the advantages this new system could bring to MMA judging. Most importantly, dominant rounds are finally worth more than close rounds. If you win 3 close rounds but lose 2 dominant ones, you lose. In the current system, you would win. With more frequent 10-8s, the final scorecard would be a much more accurate representation of the whole fight. If you win 3 dominant rounds and lose 2 close ones, the fight wasn't really close at all, but in the current system, you would most likely get a 48-47 result. But with the proposed system, you would get a 48-44 scorecard, which is way more representative of who dominated the fight. The MMA community would actually know which fights were close and which fights were not. These days, a 30-27 can be a razor-close fight, but it can also represent a ridiculously lopsided contest. That's just unacceptable, and that's why the system should change. It should reward domination. It should reward separating yourself from the pack. It should somewhat tell the story of the fight. How many times have you seen a fighter win the first 2 rounds by a fine margin and then playing it safe for the 3rd round because he thinks he's got it in the bag? With the 100% rule, you cannot take a round off anymore, because if you run the whole round and the other guy clearly wins it, it's a 10-8. There will be no more give-up rounds anymore, because they're not affordable. They're worth too much. Plus, the rounds that are hard to score will not be as influential, since close rounds aren't always 10-9. When you think about it, when there's controversy in a decision, it's often only one round that makes the difference. For example, the third round of Holloway versus Volkanovsky 2, or the third round of Gustafsson versus Jones 1, or the third round of Reyes versus Jones, the second round of Costa versus Romero, you name it. All very close rounds that made the difference ultimately. But with the proposed system, these rounds will not be as important, as 10-8s are worth more than 10-9s. Try to judge some of these fights with the 100% rule and you'll see the controversy goes away pretty quick. Yes, there will be more draws, but not that many, especially if we have 5 judges instead of 3. And also especially because of this, right now, point deductions are very damaging for fighters and referees are hesitant to enforce them. With more frequent 10-8s and 10-7s, refs will be able to deduct a point much sooner without affecting the scorecard massively. Taking a point for illegal strikes can now be enforced more often if the foul is intentional, and as a result, fouls will happen less often. So, before we take a look at the numerous perks of an open system, let's judge the controversial Holloway versus Volkanovsky fight with the help of the 100% rule. So we're gonna look at the whole 25-minute fight in slow-mo, just kidding. From what I've seen, every fan gave Holloway the first 2 rounds. As far as I'm concerned, giving the first or the second for Volkanovsky is impossible, which means I'm 100% sure Max won both rounds, especially because of the knockdowns. First round, 10-8 Max, and second round, 10-8 Max. After that, the rounds were closer. Some people gave Max the third, and some gave it to Volkanovsky. Regardless of who you gave it to, the round was close, and you probably cannot be 100% certain of who won it. So that's 10-9. All 3 judges gave the third to Alex, which is definitely not terrible, considering how the round went. So for the sake of it, let's score it 10-9 Volkanovsky. Fourth round. Most scored it Volkanovsky, but can we be 100% sure he won it? I don't think so. 10-9 Volkanovsky. Fifth round. 1 judge gave it to Max, 2 gave it to Alex. It was a close round for sure, and by definition, a 10-9. So let's say we scored the last 3 for Volkanovsky. 10-9 because we have some kind of doubt for all 3 rounds, as they were close. The final scorecard would show 47-46 Holloway. With that score, no one would have felt robbed, because the rounds that Holloway clearly won were more significant in the fight and counted for more on the scorecards. If you're still not convinced, try to judge some controversial fights using this system. Reyes versus Jones, for example. Felder versus Hooker is another good one. Don't get me wrong, the system I'm proposing is still extremely subjective, but at least it finally uses 10-8s more efficiently. It allows fights to be scored more fairly by making domination count on the judges' cards. That being said, I think the best addition the UFC could put in the current system is to publicly share the scores in between rounds. An open system. Let's imagine that for a second. After each round, judges have 30 seconds to enter their scores in an electronic device. 15 seconds later, the scores have been verified and processed and appear on the big screen. Imagine the tension in the arena after a round. We all deliberate for 30-40 seconds, replaying the last 5 minutes in our heads, and then a beeping sound, a 5-second countdown, and the scores appear on the big screen. Just imagine how amazing that could be for the fans, for the coaches, and for the fighters as well. For one, at least if you're getting robbed, you have the chance to push more because you know you need to. Aren't you tired of seeing 2 fighters raise their hands after a fight, both convinced they've won it? Aren't you sick of hearing corners say, "You're doing great," when their fighters are getting dominated? Aren't you sick and tired of hearing commentators say, "We might be 2-2 going into the 5th"? Aren't you livid when you see a fighter not push for a finish because he doesn't know for sure if he needs to? Personally, I don't ever want to hear that sentence again. I thought I was winning the fight. Fans, coaches, and fighters should know what to expect. With an open system, fighters won't feel as robbed because they won't be totally surprised when the final decision is announced. There would be less fan outrage after decisions because we often forget how the rounds went, and the big screen would keep our memories fresh. With an open system, People would actually know the scores, and it would push both teams to perform if the fight is close. There would be much more strategy involved in corners. Fighters would actually know when they need to finish or when they need to dominate. We would clearly see who really wants to win a fight, who wants it more. Plus, in between rounds, it adds a lot of drama in the corners and a lot of suspense in the crowd. An open system with more frequent 10-8s would actually keep the feeling of it's not over until it's over. Imagine knowing before the last round that a fighter needs a 10-8 for a draw or a finish or a 10-7 for the win. It would force everyone to be engaged in the fight. MMA would change forever, for the better. And it must be said, with the proposed system that has less 10-9s, it would be easier to identify incompetent judges. For example, when there is a 2-point gap for a round between two judges, something is wrong and it can be rectified later. Let's say someone scores a 10-8 for one fighter, but the other scores a 10-9 for the other fighter. That's too big of a gap and someone is wrong. Because if you're 100% convinced someone won a round, it makes no sense that someone would score it for the other guy. But if they score it 10-9 in opposite directions, it's fine. It happens all the time. The MMA community wants what is fair. Fighters want what is fair. We want justice to prevail. We want scorecards that show what happened. We want to give fighters the chance to come back by letting them know when they have to. Sometimes the judges are terrible. It's true. But most of the time, when we feel robbed, it's not because of them. It's because of the system, and it needs to change. If you feel like this new proposed system would be an improvement, share this video. If you have suggestions regarding MMA judging, write them in the comments. Thank you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. See ya.